Come closer. I have a story for you tonight, one that kept me up past midnight when I first discovered it. It's about a woman who spent 23 years believing she was invisible, forgettable, the unfortunate contrast to everything beautiful in her family. And it's about the Duke who saw her across a crowded ballroom and knew, with a certainty that bordered on madness, that she was the only woman in England he would ever want. This is the Duke's revenge, and I'm so glad you're here. Tell me, where in the world am I reaching you tonight? Whether you're in bed, on a train, cooking dinner, or hiding from responsibilities, drop your location and your local time below. I love knowing who's listening. Tonight's story begins with a simple truth that society refused to acknowledge. Beauty, real beauty, has nothing to do with symmetry or fashion, or the arbitrary standards whispered behind fans at Almack's. It has to do with something far more dangerous, something that cannot be taught or bought or painted onto a face. And when the Duke of Northcliffe walked into Lord Ashton's autumn ball in 1847, he was about to prove that lesson in a way that would upend everything society thought it knew about desire. But before that moment, before everything changed, there was a girl standing in the shadows of her sister's light. A girl who had learned, through years of careful cruelty, exactly how little she was worth. Let me take you back to September of 1847, when the leaves were just beginning to turn gold in Hampshire, and when Louisa Harding had no idea that her life was 3 hours away from shattering into something entirely new. The morning had begun, as all mornings in the Harding household began, with Arabella. Louisa stood in the doorway of her sister's dressing room, watching as 3 maids fluttered around Arabella like moths drawn to an irresistible flame. One was arranging the golden curls that cascaded down her sister's back like spun sunlight. Another was holding up 2 ribbons, one the color of spring violets, the other a deep rose, awaiting judgment with the nervous anticipation of a courtier presenting tribute to a queen. The third was on her knees, making infinitesimal adjustments to the hem of a gown that had arrived from London just yesterday, a confection of cream silk and delicate lace that probably cost more than most families spent on food in a year. The violet, Lady Miriam declared from her position on the chaise, not looking up from the letter she was reading. It brings out her eyes. But Mama, the rose is more striking, Arabella began, her voice carrying that particular wheedling tone she used when she wanted something and expected to get it. The violet, the Duke of Northcliffe, will be in attendance tonight, and I will not have you looking like every other desperate debutante in that ballroom. Subtlety, Arabella. Elegance. We are not trying to catch his eye. We are trying to make him believe that catching you was entirely his own idea. Louisa remained silent in the doorway, knowing better than to announce her presence. She had learned, through years of invisible observation, that she gathered far more information when people forgot she existed. It was one of the few advantages of being the daughter no one thought to notice. She heard things, saw things, understood things that the beautiful and the watched could never comprehend. The Duke of Northcliffe. Even the name seemed to carry weight, like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples through every conversation it touched. Rhys Montague, the 9th Duke of Northcliffe, master of Thornbury Hall, and 7 other estates scattered across England like jewels on a map, commander of a fortune so vast that it was spoken of in hushed, almost reverent tones, even among families who counted their wealth in tens of thousands. Unmarried at 32, famously cold, reportedly cruel, and according to every marriage-minded mama in England, the most eligible bachelor of the decade, perhaps of the century. He has refused every invitation for 3 years, Lady Miriam continued, folding her letter with crisp precision that suggested the news it contained was either very good or very bad. 3 years. The man has not attended a single ball, a single dinner, a single garden party. And now, suddenly, he accepts Lord Ashton's invitation to a country ball? No, there is purpose here. He is looking for a wife, mark my words. And that wife will be you, Arabella. What if he's dreadfully boring? Arabella pouted, admiring her reflection in the mirror with the unconscious self-satisfaction of someone who had never doubted her own beauty for a single moment of her 19 years. What if he only wishes to discuss politics and hunting? I heard Lady Thornton say he never smiles. Then you will find politics and hunting fascinating, and you will make him smile. Lady Miriam's voice carried the particular edge that permitted no argument, the edge that had shaped both her daughters, though in very different ways. Do you understand me? This is not a game. This is the difference between being a duchess and being nothing. Louisa watched her mother's gaze flicker almost imperceptibly toward the doorway, toward her. The pause was brief, barely a heartbeat, but it communicated everything that had ever been communicated between them. This is the difference between being Arabella and being you. Louisa. Lady Miriam's voice sharpened like a blade drawn from a sheath. Why are you lurking there like a servant? Come in properly, or go away. Your presence is distracting. Louisa stepped into the room, smoothing down the skirts of her plain gray morning dress, one of only 4 dresses she owned, all of them in colors that seemed designed to make their wearer disappear. I wanted to ask about tonight, Mama. Mrs. Pembleton said I should confirm my attendance with you. Lady Miriam's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, or something colder. Something that had been there as long as Louisa could remember, since the day she had first understood that her mother looked at her and saw a disappointment in human form. Your attendance for the ball, Lord Ashton's ball. I am aware of which ball. Lady Miriam set down her letter and regarded her eldest daughter with the particular expression she reserved for inconvenient problems. Servants who asked for wages, tradesmen who expected payment, daughters who failed to be beautiful. You wish to attend? I am 23, Mama. Society will think it strange if I am not. Society thinks nothing of you at all, Louisa. That is rather the point. The words landed with practiced precision, finding the soft places where similar words had landed 1,000 times before. Louisa absorbed them the way she absorbed everything, silently, completely, adding them to the collection she kept in some locked room of her heart. Someday, perhaps, she would open that room and let everything out. Someday, perhaps, she would scream all the things she had never been permitted to say. But not today. Not yet. The purpose of tonight, Lady Miriam continued, as though she had not just delivered a casual cruelty, is to secure the Duke of Northcliffe's attention for your sister. Your presence would be a distraction at best. At worst, she trailed off, allowing the silence to complete her thought with more devastation than any words could achieve. At worst, people would see them side by side. Arabella, with her golden curls and cornflower eyes, her rosebud lips and porcelain skin, the perfect English beauty, the diamond of every season she deigned to attend. And Louisa, with her mud-brown hair that refused to hold a curl no matter how many hours the maid spent with hot irons, her 2 sharp features that seemed designed for severity rather than softness, her eyes that were an indeterminate color, that could not even commit to being properly gray or green. The contrast would be a cruelty to both of them, though only one of them would truly suffer from it. "Of course, Mama," Louisa said quietly. "Besides..." Lady Miriam turned back to overseeing Arabella's preparations, already dismissing her eldest daughter from her attention. "Someone must stay with your father. His nerves have been dreadful lately, and the household cannot run itself." Louisa's father, the Earl of Wentworth, had retreated to his study 3 years ago following a scandal involving bad investments and worse judgment. He emerged occasionally for meals, but mostly he existed in a fog of brandy and regret, a ghost haunting his own home. He would not notice whether Louisa stayed or went. He barely noticed she existed at all, but Louisa only nodded because nodding was what was expected, and she had learned long ago that expectations were the only currency that mattered in this house. "I shall check on Papa, then," she said, and turned to leave. "Louisa." She paused at the door, her hand on the frame, her back still turned. She knew what was coming. There was always something more. Lady Miriam did not look up from adjusting Arabella's neckline. "See that you wear something appropriate for dinner, something dark. I do not want you drawing attention when the neighbors arrive for the pre-ball gathering." Something dark, because even at a dinner she was permitted to attend, she must fade into the background like furniture, like wallpaper, like nothing. "Yes, Mama." Now, I must pause here to explain something crucial about the position of unmarried daughters in 1847 England, something that will help you understand just how trapped Louisa was and how extraordinary her eventual escape would be. Society in this era operated on a brutal calculus. A woman's worth was measured in beauty, dowry, and family connections, in roughly that order. A plain daughter with a good dowry might secure a respectable match, a country gentleman perhaps, or a clergyman with prospects. A beautiful daughter with no dowry might charm her way into prosperity, trading her looks for a husband willing to overlook her lack of fortune. But a plain daughter whose family had suffered financial scandal? She was, for all practical purposes, unmarriageable. She was damaged goods twice over, and society had no use for damaged goods. The Harding family's situation was precarious in the extreme. The Earl's disastrous investments, a railway scheme that had turned out to be fraudulent, a colonial venture that had collapsed spectacularly, had not quite ruined them. Wentworth House was entailed and could not be sold, thank God, or they would have lost even the roof over their heads. But the family's income had been reduced to a fraction of what it once was. There was only enough money to properly present one daughter to society, to dress her beautifully, to host the parties that might attract a suitable husband. And so, a choice had been made, silently but irrevocably, years ago. Arabella, with her diamond beauty, would be that daughter. Louisa would wait in the wings, hoping that her sister's brilliant match might somehow reflect enough light to illuminate her own prospects. Perhaps Arabella's husband would have an unmarried brother. Perhaps there would be a widower in his circle who needed a sensible wife to manage his household and raise his children. Perhaps. It was a cruel system, but it was the only system anyone knew. And Louisa had accepted it, as one accepts the weather or the turning of seasons, as immutable fact, as the simple shape of reality. She did not know that by midnight, reality would prove far more malleable than she had ever imagined. "300 miles away, in a locked room at Thornbury Hall, a man who had never believed in fate was staring at evidence that suggested he might be wrong. Rhys Montague, Duke of Northcliffe, stood before a writing desk that held exactly 17 items. Not papers, not ledgers, not the correspondence that any rational man of business might accumulate. No, these items were something else entirely, something that would have horrified him if he had allowed himself to think about them too clearly. A pressed violet, brown now with age, that had fallen from a young woman's hair 3 years ago at a funeral dinner she had not wanted to attend. A fragment of ribbon, green, faded, that had been abandoned on a chair when she rose to leave. A sketch, made from memory in the dark hours of the night, of a face in profile, sharp features, contemplative expression, eyes fixed on something beyond the frame. He had drawn it dozens of times, never quite capturing what he saw in his mind. A list of books, painstakingly compiled from booksellers' records and servants' gossip, that she had been seen reading over 37 separate occasions of observation. And letters. 13 letters, written over 3 years, that had never been sent. My dear Miss Harding, the first one began in handwriting that started confident and grew increasingly desperate. You don't know me, but I have been unable to forget you since the evening of Lord Wyndham's dinner. I saw you sitting in the corner with your book, and something shifted inside me, something I cannot name and cannot explain. I have spent the week since that night trying to convince myself that what I felt was nothing more than passing fancy, but I find that I cannot. I find that I think of you constantly. I find that I compare every woman I meet to you and find them wanting. I find that I am, quite possibly, going mad. He had written it the night after he'd first seen her. He had not sent it because even then, even in the grip of whatever madness had seized him, he had known how it would sound. A duke, writing unsolicited letters to an earl's daughter he had never met. A man of 30 claiming obsession with a woman of 20, who had done nothing more remarkable than read a book in a corner. It would sound like the ravings of a lunatic. It would frighten her. It would ruin any chance he might ever have of actually knowing her. And yet he had written 12 more letters in the years since, each one more honest than the last, each one sealed and never sent. Each one added to this collection, this shrine he forced himself to call it, because there was no other word for what he had built, that proved beyond any doubt that the cold, unfeeling Duke of Northcliffe was capable of feeling after all. The problem was, he only seemed capable of feeling for one person, and that person had no idea he existed. Rhys reached into the desk drawer and withdrew the most recent addition to his collection, a single page torn from a bookseller's catalog. The title was circled in ink, Principles of Architectural Harmony in the English Country House. Beside it, in his own handwriting. She ordered this on the 14th of August. The bookseller confirmed delivery to Wentworth House on the 18th. He knew her reading habits better than he knew his own. He knew that she preferred history to poetry, that she had strong opinions about the Baroque period, that she spent her mornings in her father's library when the rest of the household was still abed. He knew that she took long walks along the north path behind Wentworth House, always alone, always stopping at the same oak tree to watch the birds in its branches. He knew that she wore green when she had a choice, though her mother usually did not give her a choice. He knew everything about her, except the one thing that mattered most, how she would react when she finally met him. Your Grace. The voice of his valet, Morrison, came through the door, respectful as always, but with an edge of impatience that suggested he had been waiting longer than he liked. The carriage is ready. If you wish to make Lord Ashton's ball by 9, I am aware of the time. Rhys turned from the desk, his jaw tight. 3 years. 3 years of telling himself this was madness, that he should forget the woman in the corner with her book and her furrowed brow and her complete indifference to the performance happening around her. 3 years of attending social functions and scanning every room for her face, only to be disappointed when she was not there. 3 years of reports from the investigator he had hired, an expense he told himself was merely prudent, merely cautious, not at all the behavior of a man losing his grip on sanity. And now, finally, she would be there, at Lord Ashton's ball. The reports had confirmed it. Miss Louisa Harding would accompany her family to the event. Her sister was to be presented to him as a potential bride, another beautiful empty-headed creature in a long line of beautiful empty-headed creatures. But she, Louisa, would be there. After 3 years of near misses and strategic absences, she would be in the same room as him. He crossed to the mirror, examining his reflection with cold assessment. He was not handsome. He had never been handsome, and he had long since stopped caring about such superficial concerns. His features were too harsh, his coloring too dark, his expression too severe. He looked, he knew, like a man who had never smiled in his life, and that was not far from the truth. Women looked at him and saw power, wealth, a title that opened every door in England. They did not see a man worth wanting for himself. But she had not looked at him at all. That was the thing that haunted him, that kept him awake in the dark hours when he should have been sleeping. That night at Lord Wyndham's dinner, surrounded by women casting calculating glances in his direction, she had not even noticed he existed. She had been entirely absorbed in her book, in her own world, indifferent to the social machinations unfolding around her. It had been the most attractive thing he had ever witnessed. "I'm going to speak to her tonight," he said aloud, to no one in particular, or perhaps to the man in the mirror, who looked back at him with eyes that held equal parts determination and terror. "I'm going to speak to her, and she is going to see me, and I'm going to know, finally, whether this obsession is madness or fate." His reflection stared back at him, offering no opinion on the distinction between the two. Perhaps, he thought as he turned away, there was no distinction at all. To was open them. Louisa walked through the familiar corridors of Wentworth House, her footsteps echoing against marble that had been in her family for 6 generations. Portraits of ancestors lined the walls, beautiful women with knowing smiles, handsome men with commanding stares. She had searched those faces as a child, desperate to find some echo of herself, some proof that she belonged to this lineage of striking creatures. She had found nothing, not a single sharp jaw, not a single pair of changeable eyes, not a single face that looked back at her with recognition. She was a stranger in her own ancestral home, a changeling left among swans. She paused outside her father's study, listening for movement within. Hearing none, she pushed open the door. The Earl of Wentworth sat where he always sat, in the leather chair by the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. The curtains were half drawn, casting the room in a perpetual twilight that matched his mood. He was staring at the gardens beyond the glass, though Louisa doubted he saw them. His eyes had that particular glaze that suggested he was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere in the past, perhaps, where his investments hadn't failed, and his wife still looked at him with something other than contempt. "Papa." He stirred slightly, as though waking from a dream. What is it?" "I came to sit with you, if you'd like company." For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or even affection. A ghost of the father he had been before everything went wrong. But it passed quickly, replaced by the vague confusion that had become his default expression. "Company, yes. That would be, yes." Louisa settled into the chair across from him, pulling a book from the shelf, nearby. The same shelf she had been pulling books from since she was old enough to read. The same chair she had curled up in as a child, while her father worked at his desk and occasionally looked up to smile at her. Those days seemed very far away now. Another lifetime, another world. She had no expectation of conversation. Her father's good days were behind him, and even on those good days, he had never quite known what to do with her. She was not beautiful like Arabella, not charming like his late sister had been, not clever in the ways that mattered to society. She was simply Louisa. Quiet, plain, forgettable Louisa, and he had long ago run out of things to say to her. But she sat with him anyway, because someone should. Because even if he did not notice her presence, she could not bear the thought of him sitting alone in this darkened room while the rest of the world prepared for parties he would never attend. Because despite everything, despite the years of neglect and the fog of brandy and the slow dissolution of everything they had once been to each other, he was still her father, and she still loved him. An hour passed. The light shifted through the windows, marking the passage of afternoon into evening. Louisa read her book, a treatise on architectural preservation that she had borrowed from her father's library, while her father dozed in his chair, occasionally muttering in his sleep about railway shares and colonial ventures and all the things that had gone wrong. "Louisa." His voice startled her. He so rarely spoke her name, so rarely spoke at all these days, that hearing it felt almost like hearing a stranger call to her from across a crowded room. "Yes, Papa? You look like my mother." His eyes for a moment were clear, focused, present. The eyes of the man he had been before the scandal, before the retreat, before the slow and terrible drowning. She was not beautiful either. Not in the way people mean when they say beautiful. But she was extraordinary. Everyone who knew her said so. The most extraordinary woman they had ever met. Louisa felt her throat tighten, felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "I did not know that. Your mother never liked me to speak of her. She thought—" He trailed off, his gaze drifting toward the window, toward the gardens that held so many memories of a life that no longer existed. She thought beauty was the only thing that mattered, the only thing that could save a woman in this world. She was wrong. She was always wrong about that. "Papa." My mother read constantly. Books everywhere, always. She had opinions about everything. Architecture, philosophy, the proper way to manage an estate, the correct method for brewing tea. Men twice her age deferred to her judgment because they knew she was usually right. She terrified them, I think. Terrified and fascinated them in equal measure. His voice grew distant, nostalgic, filled with a warmth that Louisa had almost forgotten he was capable of feeling. She told me once that the most dangerous thing a woman could be was interesting, because interesting women couldn't be ignored, and society doesn't know what to do with women it can't ignore. It was the most he had said to her in 3 years. Louisa wanted to respond, to ask questions, to hold on to this moment of connection like a drowning woman clutching at a rope. But even as she opened her mouth, she saw the clarity fading from his eyes, the fog rolling back in. "Papa, what is it?" He was gone again. Wherever he went in his mind, she could not follow. But she sat with him for another hour anyway, holding on to those words like a lifeline. "You look like my mother." She was extraordinary. The most dangerous thing a woman could be was interesting. It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her in years. And it was the thing that made her decide, with sudden, fierce certainty, that she was going to that ball tonight. Whatever the cost, whatever the consequences, she was done being invisible. She was done being nothing. The ballroom at Ashton Manor blazed with light. Hundreds of candles flickered in crystal chandeliers, casting dancing shadows across walls, papered in deep burgundy and gold. The orchestra played something elegant and forgettable, providing a backdrop for the true music of the evening. The rustle of silk gowns, the murmur of calculated conversations, the particular frequency of ambition vibrating through the perfumed air. Every family of consequence had turned out for this ball. Every mama with a marriageable daughter had schemed and plotted for an invitation. Because the Duke of Northcliffe would be there. And the Duke of Northcliffe was looking for a wife. Louisa should not have been there. She understood this fact completely, felt it in the way her mother's eyes had frozen when she'd descended the stairs in her dark green gown. Not the funeral black she'd been instructed to wear, but not quite rebellious either. Just present, visible, a daughter instead of a shadow. "What are you doing?" Lady Miriam had hissed, too aware of the gathered guests to cause a proper scene. Mrs. Pemberton was taken ill. Someone needed to accompany Arabella as chaperone. It was a lie, but a convenient one. Mrs. Pemberton, their aged aunt who served as occasional chaperone, had indeed complained of headaches. Whether those headaches would have prevented her attendance, Louisa did not know and did not care. She had simply seen an opportunity, her father's words still ringing in her ears, that unexpected gift of recognition, and seized it. The first time in her 23 years she had done something so reckless. The first time she had deliberately defied her mother's wishes. The first time she had decided that her own desires mattered more than the expectations placed upon her. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. She was beginning to suspect, the first step toward becoming whoever she was actually meant to be. And now here she stood, pressed against the wall of Lord Ashton's magnificent ballroom, watching Arabella shine at the center of a constellation of admirers. Her sister was radiant tonight. There was no denying it. The violet ribbon had been the right choice. It made her eyes look almost supernaturally blue, and the cream gown floated around her like something from a painting. Every eligible gentleman in the room had found an excuse to approach her. Every marriage-minded mama was calculating odds and strategies, wondering whether their own daughter might somehow compete. Louisa sipped her champagne, her first glass, which she was making last because she knew better than to draw attention by requesting another, and observed. She had become an expert observer over the years. It was, perhaps, the only useful skill her invisibility had granted her. She noticed the way Lord Hartington's eyes lingered too long on Arabella's décolletage, suggesting interest of a less than honorable variety. She noticed how Sir William Parkington kept touching his pocket watch, indicating either boredom or an engagement he was anxious about. She noticed how the Dowager Duchess of Ashton was pretending not to watch the young people while actually cataloging every interaction for later gossip. What she did not notice, not at first, was the man watching her from across the room. Rhys had positioned himself strategically, near enough to the entrance that his arrival would be noted, far enough from the dancing that he would not be importuned for partners. His appearance had caused the expected ripple of excitement. 3 years of absence had only increased his mystique, but he had ignored every attempt at conversation, every flutter of fans, every strategically placed beautiful daughter. Because she was there. Finally, after 3 years, she was there. His eyes had found her the moment he walked in, standing against the wall in her dark green gown, observing the room with that particular intensity he remembered from 3 years ago. She was doing exactly what she had been doing at Lord Wyndham's dinner, watching, studying, seeing everything while everyone looked past her to something shinier. She was exactly as he remembered, more, perhaps. The sharp features that society dismissed as plain seemed to him elegant, intelligent, full of character that more conventionally beautiful faces lacked entirely. The way she held herself, straight-backed but not rigid, present but somehow apart, suggested a mind that was always working, always analyzing, never content with surface impressions. He watched her watch the room, and he felt something in his chest tighten almost painfully. 3 years. 3 years of waiting for this moment, and now that it was here, he found himself frozen. What if she dismissed him as she dismissed everyone else? What if the connection he had felt had built, perhaps, into something larger than reality could support, existed only in his imagination? What if she looked at him with polite disinterest and walked away, leaving him with nothing but 17 items in a locked room and a heart that had never learned to let go? Then she turned her head, and their eyes met. The moment lasted perhaps 2 seconds, an eternity, a heartbeat. She did not smile, neither did he, but something passed between them, some recognition that defied explanation, like seeing a face from a dream suddenly made flesh, like hearing a melody you've always known but never been able to name. She looked away first, color rising in her cheeks. Rhys began to move. The crowd parted for him automatically. People always moved for a duke, whether they meant to or not, and he barely noticed them. His entire focus had narrowed to the woman in green, who was now staring determinedly at her champagne glass as though it contained the secrets of the universe. "You were watching me." His voice came out lower than he intended, rougher. 3 years of imagined conversations, and this was what he opened with. "You were watching me," as though she were the one who had been staring. She looked up, and this close, he could see that her eyes were neither gray nor green, but something in between, changeable, like water, like weather, like things that couldn't be pinned down or possessed. "I beg your pardon. You were watching me." "Everyone was watching you, Your Grace. You are rather difficult to ignore." "That is not what I meant." "Then I confess I do not understand your meaning." He did not understand it either, if he was honest. He only knew that she had looked at him differently than everyone else, not with calculation, not with hunger, not with the desperate hope of a woman seeking a wealthy husband. She had looked at him with something that looked almost like curiosity, as though he were a puzzle rather than a prize. "Who are you?" he asked, though he knew. He had known her name for 3 years. He had whispered it to himself in the dark, tested its weight on his tongue, written it in the margins of books he would never show anyone. "Miss Louisa Harding, Your Grace, the Earl of Wentworth's daughter." Wentworth. He made himself frown, as though searching through mental files, when in fact he could have recited her family tree from memory. "The one with the financial troubles." Heat flooded her cheeks. Embarrassment, he thought, or perhaps anger. "Yes." "And the beautiful daughter who has been throwing herself at every titled bachelor in London for 3 seasons. The description was calculated, harsh enough to provoke, honest enough to be undeniable. He watched her spine stiffen, watched the flush of embarrassment transform into something fiercer, something more interesting. "My sister is considered one of the great beauties of the age, Your Grace. She does not need to throw herself at anyone. And yet here she is, positioned precisely in my eyeline, laughing at exactly the right volume, touching her hair with calculated frequency." He kept his voice clinical, detached, even as his heart hammered against his ribs. "Tell me, Miss Harding, does she practice these gestures in front of a mirror, or do they come naturally?" She should have defended her sister. It was the appropriate response, the proper response, the response that would not cause a scandal. Instead, she said, "Both, I suspect. Arabella is nothing if not dedicated." The honesty of it hit him like a blow. In 3 years of society, in a lifetime of empty conversations and calculated compliments, he had never heard anyone speak with such unguarded candor. It was intoxicating. It was exactly what he had known she would be, and it was somehow still surprising. "And what about your success, Miss Harding? I am 23, plain, and the daughter of a man whose investments were the subject of drawing-room whispers for an entire season. My success, such as it is, consists of not causing my family further embarrassment. You consider yourself plain." Something in his tone made her look up, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. There was no mockery there, which she had expected. No pity either, which she had feared. Instead, there was something that looked almost like hunger, as though he were a man starving, and she were a feast he could not quite believe was real. "I am aware of my appearance, Your Grace. I own a mirror." "Then I suggest you obtain a new one. Yours appears to be defective." Before she could respond, and truly, what response was there to such a statement? He had already signaled for champagne. 2 glasses. He handed her one without asking if she wanted it. "You were reading a book earlier today, on architecture. I could see the binding in your reticule when you entered." Louisa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the ballroom. "How could you possibly? I noticed things." His eyes held hers, and there was something almost like warning in them. "I notice everything about you, Miss Harding. I have for quite some time." She should have been frightened. Any sensible woman would have been frightened. Instead, she heard herself ask, "What else have you noticed?" The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Closer than any expression she had seen him wear since he entered the ballroom. "That you prefer honey cakes to any other sweet. That you take long walks along the north path behind Wentworth House, always alone, always in the morning when the dew is still on the grass. That you have a habit of mouthing words when you read, as though testing their weight on your tongue before committing them to memory." He paused. "That you are the most fascinating woman in any room you enter, and no one seems to realize it but me. That's impossible. We've never met before tonight. Haven't we?" His voice dropped, intimate, dangerous. "Lord Wyndham's funeral dinner, 3 years ago. You were sitting in a corner, half hidden behind a potted fern, reading a book while everyone else performed their grief. You never once looked up. You never once noticed me watching you." The memory surfaced slowly, reluctantly. A dreary evening she had tried her best to forget. A tedious dinner full of people pretending to mourn a man none of them had particularly liked. The blessed escape of a book she'd smuggled in her reticule. She remembered the fern. She remembered the relief of being invisible in a room full of mourners who were only mourning because it was expected of them. She did not remember him at all. "I spent the next 3 years trying to forget you," he continued, his voice rough, with something that might have been confession. "I told myself it was madness, that I had invented a connection that didn't exist, that I was fixating on a woman I didn't know based on nothing more than the way she read a book in a corner. But I couldn't forget. So I waited, and I watched, and I told myself that if I ever had the chance to speak to you, I would know within minutes whether the connection was real or whether I had simply lost my mind. And? What is your verdict?" "My verdict, Miss Harding, is that I have not lost my mind. The connection is real. You are real. And I have no intention of waiting another 3 years to discover where this leads." He reached into his pocket and withdrew something small, something that caught the candlelight and gleamed faintly green. A ribbon, faded with age. But unmistakably, impossibly, the ribbon she had worn in her hair that night at Lord Wyndham's dinner. The ribbon she had lost somewhere between the dining room and her carriage, and had assumed was gone forever. "You dropped this," he said quietly. "I have been keeping it safe for you." Louisa stared at the ribbon, then at the man holding it, then back at the ribbon. 3 years. He had kept a ribbon, her ribbon, for 3 years. He had carried it with him, preserved it, treasured it like a holy relic. "That is either romantic," she whispered, "or the behavior of a man I should run from very quickly. Perhaps both." His eyes never left her face. "Are you running?" She should have said yes. Any sensible woman would have said yes. Instead, She reached out and took the ribbon from his hand, her fingers brushing against his palm. The touch sent a jolt through her entire body. Something electric. Something that felt like recognition and terror and longing, all tangled together. "No," she heard herself say. "I don't believe I am." And for the next 2 hours they talked. Not the polite, measured conversation of social obligation, but real talk, the kind that made everything else in the ballroom fade to insignificance. They talked about architecture and philosophy and the suffocating expectations of aristocratic life, about the books she loved and the estates he was trying to modernize, and the particular loneliness of being surrounded by people who saw only what they expected to see. Time ceased to have meaning. The ballroom continued its swirling dance around them, but Louisa was barely aware of it. She was aware only of this strange, intense man with his cold gray eyes and warm intellect, who looked at her as though she were the only person in the room worth seeing. It was Arabella who shattered the spell. From across the ballroom, Arabella Harding had been watching her sister speaking with the Duke of Northcliffe, and with each passing minute, something colder and darker had been growing in her chest. This was wrong. This was not how things were supposed to happen. She was supposed to catch the Duke's eye. She had practiced for weeks, perfected her laugh, adjusted her neckline to the precise degree that suggested availability without impropriety. She had done everything right. And yet there he stood, the most eligible bachelor in England, deep in conversation with Louisa. Plain, forgettable, invisible Louisa. "My sister," Arabella's voice was flat as she answered Lady Catherine's inquiry. "My elder sister. She is not usually in society. Not usually, but why not? She seems to be holding the Duke's attention rather effectively." "Because she is nothing," Arabella wanted to scream. "Because I have spent my entire life being the beautiful one, the worthy one, the one who matters, and she has no right to take what belongs to me." But she said none of this. Instead, she smoothed her features into a practiced smile and began moving through the crowd. "Your Grace!" She inserted herself between her sister and the Duke with a flutter of golden curls. "I have heard such wonderful things about Thornbury Hall. Perhaps you might tell me about it." The transformation in the Duke's expression was like watching a fire turn to ice. The warmth that had animated his features while speaking with Louisa vanished completely. "I'm certain Miss Louisa could explain the subject far better than I could," he said flatly. "If you'll excuse me." And then, impossibly, he turned to Louisa and bowed. A deep, formal bow reserved for women of far greater consequence. "Miss Harding, it has been a genuine pleasure. I hope we shall continue our conversation soon." He walked away without another word. Lady Miriam's fury was immediate. "What did you do?" But Louisa couldn't answer. She was still holding the faded green ribbon, trying to understand how her world had just shifted. Arabella watched the Duke disappear, and something calculating replaced the fury in her expression. If she could not have the Duke, then neither would Louisa. The Duke arrived at Wentworth House 3 hours later. Louisa was still awake when she heard the commotion in the entrance hall, voices raised in confusion, her mother's sharp tones, and then, impossibly, her name. She descended the stairs in her dressing gown to find Rhys Montague standing in her family's entrance hall at 1 o'clock in the morning. He was still in his evening clothes, though his cravat had been loosened and his hair looked disheveled. His eyes found hers the moment she appeared. "Miss Harding, I apologize for the unconventional hour, but I find myself incapable of waiting until morning." "Your Grace," Lady Miriam began, "I am speaking to your daughter, Madam." Lady Miriam fell silent. "I have spent 3 hours since leaving that ballroom trying to talk myself out of this course of action," he said. I have employed every argument of logic and prudence. None of them have been sufficient. Your Grace, 3 years. I have waited 3 years to speak to you, and now that I have, I find that speaking is not enough. He took her hand. Miss Louisa Harding, I am asking for your hand in marriage. Tonight. Now. Before I lose my nerve or you come to your senses and realize you can do far better than a cold-hearted recluse who has been obsessed with you since the age of 29. Lady Miriam made a strangled sound. Arabella, who had appeared during his speech, looked as though she might shatter. I don't understand, Louisa whispered. You barely know me. I know you read architecture for pleasure. I know you sit with a father who no longer recognizes you because you cannot bear the thought of him being alone. I know that I have spent 3 years building a shrine to you in a locked room at Thornbury Hall. Ribbons and sketches and letters I never sent. His grip on her hand tightened. I know that I should be embarrassed by that confession, but I am not, because every item in that room represents a moment when I chose to hold on to the hope that someday I would be standing exactly where I am now. A shrine. A shrine. I told you, Miss Harding, I noticed things. And what I noticed 3 years ago was a woman reading a book while the world performed around her. A woman who was exactly herself, without apology. I noticed her, and I couldn't forget her. You're mad. Undoubtedly. But I am mad in your direction, and I don't wish to recover. Louisa thought of 23 years of shadows, 23 years of being told she was nothing. And here was this man telling her she was everything. Yes. Yes? Yes. I'll marry you. He kissed her with a ferocity that stole her breath, his hands cupping her face, his body pressed against hers. When he finally broke away, he whispered, She's mine. She's been mine since the moment I saw her, and God help anyone who tries to tell me otherwise. Now, I must pause here to explain something about the institution of marriage in Victorian England that will help you understand the enormity of what was about to happen. Marriage, for women of the aristocracy, was not primarily about love. It was a business transaction, a political alliance, a mechanism for the transfer of property and the continuation of bloodlines. The Marriage Act of 1836 had introduced civil marriages, but the social expectations remained unchanged. A woman married to secure her future, to escape the stigma of spinsterhood, to fulfill her duty to her family. Love, if it came at all, was a pleasant bonus, not an expectation. For a duke to propose marriage based on love alone, without consideration of dowry or connections or strategic advantage, was almost unprecedented. For him to propose to a woman society considered unmarriageable, a woman without beauty, without fortune, without the social standing that might compensate for these deficiencies, was nothing short of revolutionary. Louisa understood this, even in the dizzying aftermath of his proposal. She understood that what he was offering her went against every rule society had established. She understood that accepting would invite scrutiny, criticism, suspicion. She understood that people would assume the worst, that there must be some scandal, some secret, some explanation other than the simple, impossible truth that he loved her. And she accepted anyway, because when the Duke of Northcliffe looked at her, really looked at her, with those gray eyes that saw everything, she felt something she had never felt before. Visible, present, real. Not a shadow or a footnote or an afterthought, but a person worthy of attention, worthy of devotion, worthy of love. That was worth more than any scandal. That was worth any price. The days between the proposal and the wedding were filled with preparations that Lady Miriam attacked with the fervor of a general planning a military campaign. There were gowns to be ordered, not just the wedding gown, but an entire trousseau befitting a duchess. There were invitations to be sent, menus to be planned, flowers to be selected. There were visits to receive from society matrons who suddenly remembered that they had always thought Louisa a charming girl, really, quite clever, the sort who would make an excellent wife for a thinking man. Louisa bore it all with a patience she did not feel, counting the hours until she could escape to the gardens where Rhys would be waiting. Their walks had become a daily ritual, a chance to speak freely, away from the watchful eyes and straining ears of the household. "My mother is driving me slowly insane," she confided one afternoon, as they strolled along the path that led to the old oak tree. She spent 2 hours this morning debating the relative merits of white roses versus cream roses for the church arrangements. "And what was your opinion?" "That they're flowers, and they'll be dead by the following morning, and it matters not at all what color they are." She sighed. "But I couldn't say that, of course. I had to pretend to care deeply about the subtle differences in petal structure." Rhys smiled, that small, private smile that she was beginning to recognize as his version of a laugh. "You'll need to develop a tolerance for such things, I'm afraid. Thornbury Hall has 17 formal gardens, and the head gardener has opinions about all of them." 17? My grandmother was fond of gardens. Each one is dedicated to a different flowering plant. Roses, tulips, dahlias, and so on. The gardener's name is Hutchins, and he has been with the estate for 40 years. He will corner you at every opportunity to discuss soil composition and pruning schedules. Is he at least pleasant about it? He is passionate about it. Whether that translates to pleasant depends very much on one's interest in horticulture. Louisa groaned. "I'm going to be a terrible duchess." "You are going to be an extraordinary duchess." His hand found hers, warm and steady. "You are going to be yourself, and that will be more than enough." "What if it isn't? What if society decides I'm unsuitable? What if, then society can hang?" His voice carried an edge of steel. "I did not spend 3 years waiting for you, only to allow a collection of gossips and busybodies to dictate our happiness. You will be the Duchess of Northcliffe, and anyone who treats you with less than complete respect will answer to me." "That sounds rather medieval." "I am a duke. Medieval is rather our tradition." She laughed. She was laughing more often now, discovering that laughter was easier than she had thought, that joy was not as foreign as she had believed. "You know, for a man who claims to be cold and unfeeling, you are remarkably protective." "I am cold and unfeeling toward people I do not care about. You, I care about very much. The difference is significant." They had reached the oak tree, the same tree she had been visiting for years, seeking solitude and peace. Now it would be a place of different memories, memories of him. "Tell me about Thornbury Hall," she said, settling onto the stone bench that generations of Hardings had worn smooth. "Not the gardens or the architecture. Tell me about living there. What is it like to wake up there?" Rhys sat beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "It is very quiet in the mornings. The house faces east, so the sun comes through the windows early. I usually wake before the servants have stirred, and I walk the gallery that connects the old wing to the new. The portraits watch me go by, all the Montagues who came before, with their stern faces and their expectations." "Do you talk to them?" "Sometimes. When I am feeling particularly frustrated, I tell the third Duke that his taste in art was abysmal. He cannot argue. That is, the advantage of speaking to the dead. And what do you do after insulting your ancestors?" "I take breakfast in the small dining room. The formal one is far too vast for a single person. And I review correspondence. Then I meet with the estate manager, or the land agent, or whatever tenant farmer has a complaint that requires my attention. The afternoon is usually spent on business in my study. And the evening, he paused. The evenings have been very quiet, very long, lonely. I did not like to call it that. I preferred to think of it as solitude. But yes, lonely. His hand tightened on hers. That is one of the things that will change when you are there. The evenings will no longer be something to endure. We'll read together, debate architecture, argue about Palladian windows. You'll lose those arguments. I look forward to it. He turned to face her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression, something she suspected he rarely let anyone see. I want you to know something, Louisa. I have never brought anyone to that room. The one with the things I've kept. I have never shown anyone the letters, the sketches, any of it. You are the first person who knows the full extent of my obsession. And you did not run. I almost ran. Almost is not the same as actually. No, she agreed. Almost is courage. Actually, running would have been sense. I seem to have chosen courage over sense. We will make sense together. A new kind of sense. Our own. When he kissed her, gently, reverently, as though she were something precious, Louisa felt the last of her defenses crumble. She had spent 23 years protecting herself from disappointment by refusing to hope. She had built walls around her heart so high that she had forgotten there was anything behind them worth protecting. But he had seen through the walls. He had looked past them to the woman hiding behind, and he had chosen her anyway. She was, beginning to understand, the most extraordinary thing of all. But it was the third week of their courtship that revealed the true depth of his obsession, and nearly sent her running. They were walking in the gardens at Wentworth House, following the familiar path toward the oak tree, when Louisa mentioned something she had not thought about in years. "I used to sing in the church choir," she said, watching a sparrow hop between branches. "When I was younger, before Mama decided it was a waste of time that could be better spent on Arabella's lessons." Rhys went very still beside her. "St. Michael's," he said quietly. "You sang in the choir at St. Michael's, every Sunday morning and every Wednesday evening for Vespers. You stood in the second row, third from the left, because the light from the eastern window fell there, and you liked to read the hymnal without squinting." Louisa stopped walking. "How do you know that?" He did not answer immediately. His jaw was tight, and there was something in his expression that looked almost like shame. "Rhys, how do you know where I stood in the choir at St. Michael's?" "Because I attended services there." His voice was low, controlled. "For 2 years. Every Sunday that I was in Hampshire. I sat in the back pew, in the shadows, where no one would notice a stranger, and I listened to you sing." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "You attended my church for 2 years to hear me sing. I told you I was obsessed. I told you I had been watching you. Did you think I was exaggerating? I thought you meant from a distance. I thought you meant—" She trailed off because what had she thought? That his obsession was somehow reasonable? That collecting ribbons and writing unsent letters was the extent of it? "I know the name of your vicar. I know which pew your family sits in. I know that you always arrive exactly 7 minutes before the service begins, and that you leave immediately after the final blessing, because your mother dislikes socializing with the common parishioners." He turned to face her, and his eyes were dark, with something that might have been desperation. "I know that your voice, when you sing the Ave Maria, is the most beautiful sound I have ever heard. I know that I have listened to dozens of professional singers in London concert halls, and none of them have ever moved me the way you did, standing in that choir loft in a country church, singing to a God you weren't sure you believed in. You cannot know whether I believe in God. You mouth the words to the creed, but you never close your eyes during prayer. You watch the congregation instead, studying them, cataloging them, the same way you study everyone. You find the rituals comforting, but the theology unconvincing. He stepped closer. I have watched you for 3 years, Louisa. I have memorized you. I know things about you that you have not yet discovered about yourself. She should have run. Every instinct she possessed was screaming at her to run, to flee from this man who had inserted himself into her life so completely, so invisibly, that she had never once noticed his presence. Instead, she asked, "Why didn't you speak to me? In all those Sundays, why didn't you ever approach me?" Because you were 20 years old, and I was a 30-year-old duke who had no business being obsessed with an earl's daughter he had seen once at a dinner party. Because approaching you would have meant explaining why I was there, and I had no explanation that would not have sounded like madness. His voice cracked slightly. Because I was afraid that if I spoke to you, the spell would break, that you would be ordinary after all, and I would have to let you go. And now? Is the spell broken? The spell is stronger than ever. He reached for her hand, his fingers trembling slightly as they intertwined with hers. You are not ordinary, Louisa. You have never been ordinary, and I don't think I will ever be able to let you go. They stood there for a long moment in the shadow of the oak tree, while Louisa tried to understand what she was feeling. Fear, certainly. What sane woman would not be afraid? But beneath the fear, something else. Something that felt almost like recognition. He had seen her. For 3 years, while everyone else looked past her to something shinier, he had seen her. He had memorized her hymns and her habits, and the way she watched the congregation during prayers. He had built a cathedral of attention around her, brick by careful brick, without ever asking for anything in return. It was obsession. It was madness. It was perhaps the most devoted thing anyone had ever done for her. I want to hear you sing again, he said softly. Not in a church, surrounded by strangers. Here. Now. Just for me. I haven't sung in years. My voice is probably dreadful. Your voice could never be dreadful. But even if it were, I would want to hear it. I would want to hear everything you have to offer. The beautiful and the imperfect, the polished and the rough. All of it, Louisa. I want all of it. She sang for him there, beneath the oak tree, a verse of a hymn she barely remembered. Her voice cracked on the high notes, rusty from years of disuse. She forgot half the words and had to hum through the gaps. When she finished, he was looking at her as though she had just performed for the crowned heads of Europe. That, he said quietly, was worth 2 years of sitting in uncomfortable pews. It was terrible. It was you. Nothing about you could ever be terrible. And despite everything, despite the obsession and the secrets and the magnitude of what he had just confessed, Louisa felt something inside her shift, something that had been locked away for 23 years, waiting for someone to notice it was there. She did not run. She stayed. Arabella did not attend any of the wedding preparations. She claimed headaches, nervous complaints, a delicate constitution that could not bear the excitement. In truth, she spent her days in her room, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how the world had gone so terribly wrong. She had always been the beautiful one. From the moment she was born, golden-haired and blue-eyed, a perfect porcelain doll. She had been the family's hope, its investment, its future. Every shilling that could be scraped together had been spent on her presentation, her gowns, her accomplishments. She had learned to sing, to play piano, to dance with grace. She had studied the art of conversation until she could charm any man within 5 minutes of meeting him. And it had meant nothing. All of it. The years of preparation, the hours of practice, the careful cultivation of every aspect of her appearance and manner meant nothing. Because the Duke had not chosen her, the Duke had chosen Louisa. Plain, invisible, worthless Louisa. It was not fair. It was not right. It defied every law of nature, every principle of society, every truth Arabella had been raised to believe. Beautiful women were supposed to win. That was how the world worked. That was the only way the world made any sense. Unless Louisa had cheated somehow. Unless there was something more to the story than the romantic nonsense everyone seemed to believe. A duke did not simply fall in love with a plain nobody. There had to be manipulation, leverage, some hidden advantage that Louisa had exploited. And if Arabella could discover what that advantage was, if she could expose whatever deception had led to this impossible engagement, then perhaps the natural order could be restored. She began making inquiries. Discreetly, of course. She was still beautiful, still charming, still capable of extracting information from servants and shopkeepers and anyone else who might have observed the Duke's behavior over the past 3 years. What she discovered surprised her. The Duke had been asking questions about their family for years. He had hired investigators. He had compiled reports. He had been watching Louisa, learning about her, preparing for this moment long before it happened. This was not a love story. This was a scheme, a plan. And Arabella was going to expose it. She just had to wait for the right moment. Si boom. The honeymoon was spent at a small estate in the Lake District, one of Reese's smaller properties, chosen specifically for its privacy. For 2 weeks, they existed outside of time. They walked the hills and read by the fire and debated everything from politics to philosophy to the proper way to prepare tea. They learned each other's rhythms, the way Louisa went quiet when she was thinking deeply, the way Reese paced when he was frustrated, the small gestures and expressions that revealed more than words ever could. And at night, in the vast bed that had seemed so intimidating at first, they learned other things. Things that made Louisa blush to remember in the morning. Things that Reese seemed to take considerable satisfaction in teaching her. "I didn't know," she admitted one morning, wrapped in sheets that smelled of him. "That it could be like that. The way people spoke of it, I thought, what did you think? I thought it was something to be endured, a duty. Not," she trailed off, her cheeks flushing. "Not something to be enjoyed?" His smile was distinctly self-satisfied. "I assure you, Duchess, we have barely begun to explore the possibilities. That is either a promise or a threat. Possibly both." He pulled her closer, his lips brushing her temple. "I intend to spend the next 60 years discovering what pleases you. It will be a thorough investigation. You and your investigations. I'm a thorough man. It is both my greatest strength and my most annoying quality." She laughed against his chest. "I will keep that in mind for the next 60 years. They returned to Thornbury Hall in early October, when the leaves were turning gold and the air was crisp with the promise of winter. The staff lined up to greet them, all 47 servants, from the butler to the lowest scullery maid. And Louisa felt a moment of pure terror at the responsibility of it all. But Reese was beside her, solid and steady, and when he introduced her as the new Duchess, to whom you will extend the same respect you have always shown me, she saw the servants' expressions shift from curiosity to something like approval. She was not what they had expected, but neither, perhaps, had he been when he first inherited. And they had learned to appreciate him. Perhaps they would learn to appreciate her as well. "The housekeeper's name is Mrs. Hadley," Reese murmured as they entered the house. "She has been here for 30 years and knows everything about everyone. The butler is Mr. Croft, ancient, irascible, and fiercely loyal. The cook is Mrs. Parsons, and she will try to overfeed you. Let her. It makes her happy. You know all their names. I know everything about everyone in this house. It is part of my obsessive nature. I told you. I notice things. Will you keep a file on me as well? Document my habits and preferences? I already have. He smiled at her shocked expression. Did you think I would stop noticing you simply because we are married? You are even more fascinating now than you were before. I expect the file to grow considerably over the next several decades. That is deeply unsettling and strangely romantic. That, my dear Duchess, is rather the essence of our relationship. Louisa discovered that she loved Thornbury Hall. The house was vast and ancient and full of history, but it was also surprisingly welcoming, a home rather than a monument. She spent her first weeks exploring every corner, learning the names of the servants, discovering the secret passages that generations of Montague children had used for mischief. And she discovered the library. It was not a room so much as a wing. 3 interconnected chambers filled with books from floor to ceiling, representing 400 years of collected knowledge. There were first editions and rare manuscripts, treatises on every subject imaginable, novels and poetry, and philosophical works in a dozen languages. Louisa stood in the center of the largest chamber, turning slowly, her mouth slightly open. You didn't tell me about this. Rhys leaned against the doorframe, watching her with obvious pleasure. I wanted to see your face when you discovered it. I was not disappointed. There must be tens of thousands of books here. 47,000, at last count. Though the catalog is somewhat out of date. My grandfather stopped adding to it in his final years, and I have acquired several hundred volumes since. I could spend the rest of my life in this room. That was rather the plan. He crossed to join her, his hand finding its familiar place at the small of her back. The previous duchesses used the morning room for their correspondence and social obligations. But I thought you might prefer a different arrangement. This room has excellent light, a fireplace that draws properly, and a desk by the window where you can work undisturbed. You're giving me the library as my sitting room? I'm giving you everything, Louisa. The library is merely the beginning. She turned to face him, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. I don't deserve this. Any of this. You deserve far more than this. You deserve everything I can give you, and 1,000 things beyond my power to provide. You deserve to have spent the past 23 years being loved and valued and seen. His voice roughened. I cannot give you back those years, but I can give you the rest of your life. I intend to make it extraordinary. She kissed him then, standing in the middle of 47,000 books in a house that was now her home, married to a man who had waited 3 years for the privilege of loving her. It was, she thought, a very good beginning. The following weeks were a whirlwind. The announcement appeared in the Times, Rhys Montague, Duke of Northcliffe, to wed Miss Louisa Harding, daughter of the Earl of Wentworth. London society responded with collective disbelief. The rumors began immediately. She must be with child. She must have bewitched him. There must be a scandal. No one considered the simplest explanation, that he loved her. But Louisa noticed little of the gossip. She was too busy falling in love. Rhys visited every day. He brought her books, treatises on architecture, volumes of philosophy, dense texts that assumed an intelligent reader. He asked her opinions and listened when she gave them. He argued with her because he genuinely enjoyed the clash of their minds. And 1 week before the wedding, he showed her the shrine. They traveled to Thornbury Hall, and he took her to a small room on the 3rd floor with a single key he kept on his person at all times. I should warn you, he said. What you are about to see might disturb you. Show me anyway. He opened the door. The room was small, perhaps 10 feet by 12. The walls were lined with shelves, and on those shelves, Louisa stepped inside, her breath catching. The pressed violet, the ribbon she had already seen, but also sketches, dozens of them, her face rendered in charcoal from every angle. A list of books in his distinctive handwriting, with notes beside each one. She smiled at the passage about the Parthenon and appeared frustrated, turned back 3 pages to reread. A lock of her hair, though she did not know how he had obtained it. And letters. Stacks of letters, tied with ribbon, addressed to "My dear Miss Harding," and never sent. "I told you," Rhys said quietly from the doorway. "I notice things. I have been noticing you for 3 years, and I have been keeping record, because I was afraid that if I didn't, I might convince myself you weren't real." Louisa touched one of the sketches, her own face rendered with obvious care and even more obvious devotion. In his drawings, she did not look plain. She looked interesting, compelling, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with symmetry. "You drew these yourself?" "I have very little artistic talent, but I could not trust anyone else to capture you correctly. They're beautiful. They're attempts. The reality is always better." She crossed the distance between them and took his face in her hands. "Most women would run screaming from this room. Most women are not you." "No." She kissed him, not the desperate claiming of their first kiss, but something softer. Something that said, "I see you too. I see your madness and your intensity, and your desperate need to hold on to things you're afraid of losing. And I am not running." "I love you," he said. "I should have said it before. I was afraid that if I said it, you would think I was simply saying what was expected, when in fact I have loved you since you were 20 years old and completely oblivious to my existence. I love you too. I don't know how it happened so quickly. I only know that when I imagine my life without you in it, the imagining hurts. Then don't imagine it. We never have to imagine it." The wedding was held at St. George's, Hanover Square, as befitted the marriage of a duke. London society turned out in force, driven by curiosity. Louisa walked down the aisle in a gown of ivory silk, simple compared to the confections other brides might have chosen. She kept her eyes fixed on the man waiting at the altar. Rhys watched her approach with something almost like awe. The ceremony passed in a blur. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Rhys kissed her with a thoroughness that sent scandalized murmurs through the congregation. Lady Miriam basked in reflected glory. Arabella was notably absent, claiming a headache. When the guests departed, Rhys led Louisa to a private sitting room. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September when Louisa found the folder. She had been looking for a book, a treatise on Gothic architecture that Rhys had mentioned over breakfast, and had wandered into his study without thinking. He was out riding the estate with his land agent, and she had grown comfortable enough in Thornbury Hall to treat every room as her own. The study was exactly what one would expect of a duke. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, walls lined with ledgers and maps, and the accumulated paperwork of a vast estate. She crossed to the bookshelf where he kept his personal reading, scanning the spines for the title she wanted. Her elbow knocked a stack of papers from the edge of the desk. She bent to gather them, meaning to replace them in the neat pile where they had been. Rhys was particular about order, another manifestation of his obsessive tendencies, and froze when she saw the heading on the top sheet. Blackwood Investigations Report on the Harding family compiled for His Grace, the Duke of Northcliffe. Her blood went cold. She knew about the investigation. He had told her on their wedding night, confessed it really, with the air of a man laying a burden down. He had hired an investigator. He had compiled reports. He had known about her family's situation before he ever approached her at Lord Ashton's ball. But knowing about it in the abstract was different from seeing it, from holding the evidence in her hands. She should have put it down. She should have returned the papers to their pile and walked away, trusting in the explanation he had already given. He had been honest with her. He had promised no more secrets. Instead, she read. The first pages were what she expected: dry financial analysis of the Harding family's situation. The failed investments, the reduced income, the debts that had been quietly accumulating for years. Clinical and factual, the sort of thing any sensible man might want to know before aligning himself with a family. But then the pages shifted. Subject: Miss Louisa Harding, eldest daughter of the Earl of Wentworth. Age: 20 years at time of initial observation. Now 23. Appearance: plain by conventional standards. Brown hair, sharp features, eyes of indeterminate color. Does not dress fashionably. Shows no apparent interest in enhancing her appearance. And then, in Reese's handwriting in the margin, wrong, not plain, striking. The investigator has no taste. Despite herself, Louisa felt her lips twitch. She read on. Daily habits. Subject rises early, typically before other household members. Spends mornings in father's library. Takes long walks in the afternoon, usually alone. Rarely attends social functions. Reading preferences: history, architecture, philosophy. Has been observed purchasing the following titles in the past 6 months. There followed a list of books. Books she had bought. Books she had read. Books she had discussed with no one because no one in her household cared what she read. He had known. He had known what she was reading before he ever met her. Singing. Subject participated in church choir until age 18. Voice described as unremarkable by choir master. And again, in Reese's handwriting. Choir master is a fool. Voice is extraordinary. Have attended services 17 times to confirm. 17 times. He had attended her church 17 times. The door opened behind her. I see you found the file. Reese's voice was calm, but when she turned, she saw the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he was holding himself, as though bracing for a blow. You kept it. Her own voice came out steadier than she expected. After we married, you kept the investigator's reports. I kept everything. You've seen the shrine room. This is merely supplementary documentation. You had someone follow me for 3 years. Not continuously, periodically. He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. When I needed to reassure myself that you were real, that you were still there. That's obsessive? Yes. We have established that I am obsessive, Louisa. This should not be surprising information. She looked down at the papers in her hands, the clinical assessment of her appearance, the lists of her habits and preferences, the margin notes in his handwriting, correcting the investigator's observations with his own. You wrote notes. The investigator had no eye for what mattered. He catalogued facts, but missed the truth of you entirely. And what is the truth of me? He crossed the room, taking the papers from her hands and setting them aside. His fingers found hers, warm and steady. The truth of you, he said quietly, is that you are the most remarkable woman I have ever encountered. That you are kind without being weak, intelligent without being cold, observant without being cruel. That you have survived 23 years of being systematically overlooked and emerged, not bitter, but compassionate. That you sing hymns with a voice that makes me believe in God despite considerable evidence to the contrary. His lips twitched. And that you have a particular expression when you read something that surprises you. Your eyebrows draw together and your lips part slightly. And that expression has haunted me for 3 years. You're trying to distract me. I'm trying to remind you who I am, who you married, a man who notices things, a man who keeps records, a man who, Yes, had you investigated before he approached you, because he was terrified of making a mistake, of building you into something you weren't, of discovering that the woman he had been obsessing over was a figment of his imagination. And was I? You exceeded every expectation. The reports told me you were intelligent. They failed to capture the razor edge of your wit. They told me you were a reader. They failed to mention that you argue with books as though the authors might hear you. They told me you were plain. They failed to convey that your face is the most interesting face I have ever studied, and I have studied it exhaustively. Louisa felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of anxiety she hadn't realized she was carrying. I should be angry, she said. You would be well within your rights. I'm not, though. I'm just... She searched for the word. Overwhelmed by the scope of it. 3 years, Reese. 3 years of watching and documenting and planning. 3 years of waiting, he corrected. For you. Only ever for you. She looked up at him, this strange, intense, impossible man who had spent 3 years building a dossier of her existence because he could not bear to lose track of her. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that from now on, when you want to know something about me, you'll ask. No more investigators. No more watching from a distance. If you want to know what I'm reading, ask me. If you want to know what I'm thinking, ask me. I would rather be known by you than studied by strangers. I promise. His hand came up to cup her face. No more investigators. No more reports. Only us. Only us. She let him kiss her then, standing in his study surrounded by the evidence of his obsession. And she realized something that should perhaps have been obvious. Being loved by Reese Montague was not a passive experience. It was not a gentle warmth that one basked in. It was an intensity, a focus that demanded to be met with equal intensity in return. She was beginning to understand that she was capable of meeting it. What she did not know, what neither of them could have predicted, was that someone else had been watching. Someone else had been gathering information. Someone else was about to use what they had learned to try to tear them apart. But that revelation was still weeks away. For now, there was only the study, the papers, the promise, and the beginning of a trust that would be tested sooner than either of them imagined. But someone was watching. Someone who had not forgotten her humiliation. Arabella had returned to London, claiming a need to visit friends. In truth, she had been gathering information, paying servants for gossip, bribing clerks for documents. She found what she was looking for in the offices of a discreet investigator named Blackwood, the same investigator the Duke had employed. "The Duke hired you to investigate my family," Arabella said. "I want to know everything you told him." Blackwood was a professional, but Arabella was beautiful, and she was offering a substantial sum. "The Duke wanted information about your family's financial situation," Blackwood said. "He also wanted information about your sister, specifically." "What about scandal? Did you find any scandals?" Blackwood hesitated. "There was one matter. Regarding your father. An affair with a married woman. The lady's husband threatened to expose the Earl, but your mother paid him off." Arabella felt a smile spreading across her face. "I want copies. All of it." She composed the letter that night, careful to disguise her handwriting. "My dear Louisa," it began, "I am writing to warn you. Your husband is not who you think he is. Before he married you, he hired an investigator to compile a dossier on your family. He knows about your father's scandal. He did not marry you for love. He married you because you were vulnerable. Ask him about the investigator. Ask him what he really knows." She posted the letter, addressed to the Duchess of Northcliffe at Thornbury Hall. Then she sat back and waited for her sister's happiness to crumble. The first Christmas at Thornbury Hall was a revelation. Louisa had grown up in a household where Christmas was observed with dutiful restraint, a church service, a modest dinner, perhaps a small gift exchanged between family members. Nothing elaborate, nothing joyful. Joy was expensive, and the Hardings could not afford it. But Reese, it turned out, loved Christmas with an intensity that bordered on the absurd. The great hall was decorated with garlands of holly and ivy, with ribbons and candles, and a massive Yule log that took 4 men to carry. A tree stood in the corner, a tradition that had been introduced to England by Prince Albert, and that Reese had immediately adopted because it involved both precision and festivity. Gifts were distributed not only to the family, but to every servant, every tenant, every child in the village. "You're enjoying this far too much," Louisa told him, watching him personally oversee the hanging of mistletoe in every doorway. "I am enjoying it exactly the right amount. I spent years having Christmas alone. Now I have someone to share it with, and I intend to make it memorable. You're hanging mistletoe in the kitchen. The cook deserves romance as much as anyone." The months that followed were the happiest Louisa had ever known. Christmas at Thornbury Hall was a revelation. Reese loved the holiday with an intensity that bordered on the absurd, hanging mistletoe in every doorway and personally distributing gifts to every servant and tenant child. "I spent years having Christmas alone," he explained, catching her under a strategically placed sprig. "Now I have someone to share it with. I imagined everything. I told you, I am obsessive. I planned an entire life with you before I ever learned your name. That should be alarming. And yet, you don't seem alarmed. I seem to have grown accustomed to your particular brand of madness." She smiled up at him, feeling tears prick at her own eyes. "We're going to be parents." But even as she said the words, something cold settled in her chest. Parents. She was going to be a mother, like her own mother had been a mother to her. Reese noticed the shift in her expression immediately. Of course he did. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Nothing. I'm happy. Truly, I am. Louisa." His voice was gentle but firm. "We agreed. No more secrets. Tell me what you're thinking." She pulled away from him, moving to the window, needing distance to say what she needed to say. Outside, the gardens of Thornbury Hall were beginning to bloom, daffodils and crocuses pushing through the earth, the first hints of a spring that promised renewal and growth, new life, new beginnings. "I don't know how to be a mother," she said quietly. I had a model, but it was not a model I would wish to follow. My mother looked at me and saw disappointment. She looked at me and saw everything I wasn't, everything I would never be. She made me feel invisible, worthless, like I was nothing more than a burden to be managed. She turned to face him, and there were tears on her cheeks now, tears she had not even felt falling. What if I do that to our child? What if I look at this baby and see someone who isn't good enough? What if I become her, Reese? What if cruelty is hereditary, and I pass it on without even meaning to? He was at her side in an instant, pulling her back into his arms, holding her with a fierceness that felt like shelter. "Listen to me." His voice was low and intense. "You are not your mother. You could never be your mother. Do you know how I know this? How? Because your mother looks at people and sees what they can give her. She sees value in terms of beauty and status, and what can be extracted. But you," he pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "You look at people and see who they are. You saw your father in his fog of despair, and instead of writing him off as useless, you sat with him. You saw me, a cold, obsessive stranger with a collection of your belongings in a locked room, and instead of running, you tried to understand. That's different. It is exactly the same. You have spent your entire life being told you were worthless, and instead of believing it, instead of becoming bitter and cruel like so many would, you became kind. You became observant. You became someone who notices the people that everyone else overlooks, because you know what it feels like to be overlooked yourself. His thumb brushed away her tears. Our child will be the most fortunate child in England, he continued, because they will have a mother who knows, truly knows, what it feels like to be unseen, and who will make absolutely certain that they never feel that way for a single moment of their lives. They will have a mother who understands the damage that careless words can do, and who will choose her words with care. They will have a mother who loves them not for what they can offer, or what they look like, or what they achieve, but simply for who they are. You can't know that. I know you. I have been studying you for 3 years. I have memorized every aspect of your character, cataloged every kindness, documented every moment when you chose compassion over self-interest. His smile was tender. I know you, Louisa Montague, and I know that you will be an extraordinary mother, not because it will come easily. Nothing worth doing comes easily, but because you will work at it with the same determination you bring to everything else. And if I make mistakes, then we will make them together. That is what marriage means. That is what family means. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. You will not be alone in this. You will never be alone in anything again. She clung to him, crying in earnest now, not from fear, but from relief, from the overwhelming experience of being truly understood by someone who loved her anyway. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. I am terrified that I will be too controlling, too obsessive, too intense. I am terrified that I will document our child's life so thoroughly that they will feel watched rather than loved. I am terrified that I will make all the mistakes my own father made, different though they were from your mother's. He laughed softly, a sound that held equal parts humor and vulnerability. We are going to be a disaster, you and I. But we will be a disaster together. And together, we will figure out how to do this right. We're going to be the most excessive, overprotective, thoroughly besotted parents in the history of the English aristocracy. I believe I said that exact thing not 5 minutes ago. You did. I'm agreeing with you. She pulled back to look at him, feeling something settle in her chest. Not the cold weight of fear, but something warmer. Something that felt like hope. This child will be documented within an inch of its life, won't it? I intend to keep records of every milestone, every first word, every. You're going to keep a shrine to our child? I am going to keep a shrine to our entire family, several shrines, an entire wing if necessary. You are absolutely mad. Madly in love, he corrected. There's a difference. Is there? There is. He kissed her then, softly, reverently, as though she were something precious, as though she had always been something precious, even when the rest of the world refused to see it. With you, Louisa, there is all the difference in the world. The letter arrived on a gray November morning, 2 months after the wedding. Louisa was taking her breakfast in the morning room when she opened it. My dear Louisa, I am writing to warn you. Your husband is not who you think he is. Before he married you, he hired an investigator to compile a dossier on your family. He knows about your father's failed investments. He knows about the debts. He knows about the scandal your mother paid to suppress, the one involving your father and a married woman. He did not marry you for love. He married you because you were vulnerable, because your family's compromised. Position gave him leverage, because a grateful, insecure wife is a controllable wife. Ask him about the investigator. Ask him about the reports. Ask him what he really knows. A friend. She read it 3 times, her hands growing steadily colder. A scandal. Her father and a married woman. She had suspected something. The cause of his retreat was never quite explained, but no one had ever confirmed it. And Rhys had known, had always known. She found him in his study. "Did you hire an investigator?" Rhys went very still. "What? Before you married me. Did you hire a private investigator to compile reports on my family?" Silence. Then, "Yes. You knew. About my father. About the scandal." "I knew about the financial troubles. I did not know about any scandal involving your father. If such information was in the reports, I did not read that section carefully. I was looking for you, Louisa. Only you. So you catalogued me, like a business acquisition. I protected myself. From disappointment. From delusion." His hands clenched. "And what I found was that the reality was better than my imagination. But you didn't tell me, because I was afraid. Who sent the letter?" She produced it. He read it, his face hardening. "This was written to hurt you," he said. "To hurt us. Who would benefit from that?" And suddenly, with terrible clarity, Louisa knew. "Arabella. Your sister. She has every reason to want you miserable." Louisa looked at him. This man she had married. This man she loved. "I believe you," she said finally. "I believe you love me. But no more secrets. Ever. No more secrets. I swear to you. Then we need to deal with my sister." The confrontation happened at Wentworth House, in the same drawing room where Louisa had spent so many years being invisible. Lady Miriam stood by the fireplace, her face a mask of carefully controlled anxiety. She had been warned of their coming. Louisa had sent a note ahead, brief and formal, requesting a family meeting on a matter of some urgency. Whatever she had expected, it was not the cold fury in her eldest daughter's eyes. Arabella sat in the chair by the window. The same chair, Louisa realized with a jolt, where their father used to sit before his retreat into fog and brandy. She wore a morning dress of pale blue silk, her golden hair arranged in perfect ringlets, her posture the picture of elegant composure. But Louisa had spent a lifetime watching from the shadows. She saw the tension in Arabella's shoulders, the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes darted toward the door, as though calculating escape routes. "You sent the letter," Louisa said without preamble. "You hired someone to investigate my husband's investigator, and you used what you found to try to destroy my marriage." "I don't know what you're talking about." Arabella's voice was steady, but her knuckles had gone white where they gripped the armrest. The handwriting analysis was quite thorough. The paper came from a London stationer who sells primarily to young ladies of society. You purchased 3 sheets of that stock last month. Louisa withdrew the second letter from her reticule, the one from Blackwood to Arabella, confirming receipt of payment. "He kept records, your Mr. Blackwood, including correspondence with his clients, including a letter to you, confirming receipt of payment for information regarding the Duke of Northcliffe's private affairs." All the color drained from Arabella's face. For a moment, she looked almost ill, pale and shaken, her perfect composure cracking like ice under pressure. "You paid him to betray my husband's confidence? You paid him to give you information you could use to hurt me? It worked, didn't it?" The words burst out of Arabella with sudden venom. "You doubted him. I know you did. I could see it in your face when I imagined you reading that letter. The fear, the uncertainty, the wondering if everything you believed was a lie. For about 3 hours, and then I remembered that I know my husband. I know him better than I have ever known anyone. He's using you, Louisa." Arabella rose from her chair, her voice rising with her. "A duke does not marry a plain, penniless nobody unless he expects to gain something. He investigated your family. He compiled reports. He knew everything about you before he ever approached you. Don't you see how calculated that is? How strategic? You're not his love. You're his project." "A duke," Rhys said quietly, speaking for the first time. "Marries whomever he damn well pleases. And I please to marry your sister because she is the most extraordinary woman I have ever met. Because she saw me as a person rather than a title. Because she made me feel, for the first time in my life, that I was worth knowing beyond what I could provide." Arabella stared at him, at this man who had been meant for her, who should have chosen her, who had somehow looked past her beauty to see something more valuable in her plain sister. "I don't understand," her voice cracked. The composure was gone now, stripped away to reveal something raw and wounded underneath. "I'm beautiful. I'm everything a man is supposed to want. I have spent my entire life being beautiful. Do you know what that means? The hours of preparation, the discomfort of corsets and pins and potions, the endless performance of being pleasant and charming and appealing. I gave up everything to be this. I gave up books and opinions and the luxury of ever saying what I actually thought. I became exactly what I was supposed to become." "You've done everything expected," Louisa replied, and her voice was softer now. Not with sympathy, exactly, but with something that might have been recognition. "That's not the same thing as being yourself." "Being myself?" Arabella laughed, and there were tears in her eyes now. Tears that she would have rather died than show. But that came anyway. "Being myself was never an option. Mama made that very clear. I was the beautiful one, so I had to be perfect. You were the plain one, so you could do whatever you wanted because no one was watching. You could read your books and have your opinions and sit in corners being interesting while I was out there performing every single day for an audience that would destroy me the moment I stopped smiling. I never asked you to. You didn't have to ask. That was the whole point." Arabella's voice broke. "Don't you understand? We were never competing, you and I. We were never even in the same game. You got to be a person. I only got to be a face." Silence fell over the room. Lady Miriam had pressed her hand to her chest, her face pale with the dawning realization that her careful system, the beautiful daughter who would save them, the plain one who would be sacrificed, had been a cruelty to both. Louisa looked at her sister, really looked at her, and saw something she had never allowed herself to see before. Not a rival, not an enemy, a prisoner. They had both been trapped by the same system. They had simply been assigned different cells. "I could destroy you for what you've done," Louisa said finally. "I could tell society about the letter, about the investigator, about your attempt to sabotage my marriage. I could make sure you never receive another invitation, never secure a match, never recover from the scandal of your own making. Then do it." Arabella's voice was flat now, defeated. "Finish what you started. Show everyone what you really are." "What I really am," Louisa said, "is your sister. And what I'm going to do is far worse than destruction. I'm going to forgive you." Arabella blinked, uncomprehending. "What?" "I'm going to forgive you, and I'm going to walk away, and I'm going to live my life as the Duchess of Northcliffe, happy and loved and completely unconcerned with whatever petty schemes you devise in your frustration. And every time you see me, you will remember that you tried to break me and failed. You will remember that I had the power to destroy you and chose mercy instead." She paused, watching her sister's face cycle through shock, confusion, and something that might have been the beginning of shame. "But I'm also going to tell you something that Mama never told either of us. You don't have to be a face, Arabella. You could be a person if you wanted. You could read books and have opinions and say what you actually think. You could find a man who loves you for something other than your ringlets. You could stop performing and start living." Louisa's voice softened. It's not too late. It's never too late to become yourself. Arabella stared at her, tears streaming down her perfect cheeks, and for the first time in their lives, Louisa saw her sister clearly. Not as the golden child who had stolen all the sunlight. Not as the rival who had made her feel invisible. Just a girl who had been taught that her only value was her face, and who had never been given permission to believe otherwise. "I don't know how," Arabella whispered. "I don't know who I am without this." "Then figure it out." Louisa took Rhys's hand, feeling his fingers intertwine with hers, solid, steady, unshakable. "That's what I had to do. It's not easy, but it's possible." She turned to her mother, who had been silent throughout, watching her carefully constructed world crumble. "Mama, I believe a long visit to our aunt in Scotland might be beneficial for Arabella's character. Somewhere far from London society. Somewhere she can learn who she is when no one is watching." Lady Miriam nodded slowly, her eyes haunted. "Perhaps you're right. Perhaps. Perhaps I have made mistakes I did not realize I was making. It was not an apology. It would probably never be an apology. But it was something." Louisa walked out without waiting for a response, Rhys at her side. Behind her, she could hear Arabella, crying. Not the pretty, delicate tears of a woman performing sadness, but the ugly, wrenching sobs of someone confronting an uncomfortable truth. It was, perhaps, a beginning. In the carriage, Rhys pulled her close, his heartbeat steady against her ear, while the Hampshire countryside rolled past the windows. "That was magnificent," he said finally. "That was the hardest thing I've ever done." She pressed her face against his chest. "I wanted to destroy her. Part of me still wants to destroy her. But you didn't. No, because destroying her wouldn't make me feel better. It would just make me more like—" She trailed off. "More like your mother?" "Yes." The admission cost her something. "I spent my whole life being shaped by her cruelty. I don't want to become her. I don't want to pass that legacy on to our child." His hand moved to rest on her stomach, still flat, still keeping it secret from the world. "You won't. You couldn't. You are nothing like her, Louisa. You never have been. You sound very certain." "I am certain. I have been studying you for 3 years, remember? I know every aspect of your character, and cruelty is not among them." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Mercy, though. Compassion. The ability to see someone who has hurt you and still find room for forgiveness. Those things are very much who you are. Is that why you love me? That is one of approximately 700 reasons why I love you. I have them cataloged, if you would like to review the list." Despite everything, she laughed. "Of course you do. I am a thorough man. We have established this." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fields and hedgerows pass. Louisa found herself thinking about her sister, about the tears she had seen, the crack in the perfect facade, the glimpse of something wounded underneath all that golden beauty. "Do you think she'll change?" she asked finally. "Arabella?" Rhys considered. "I don't know. Change is difficult, especially for people who have built their entire identity around one thing. But you offered her something today that she may never have been offered before. What's that? Permission. Permission to be more than a face. Permission to want more than admiration." He tightened his arms around her. "Whether she takes that permission or not is up to her, but you gave her the choice. That's more than anyone else has done." Louisa nodded slowly. It was true. She had given Arabella something. Not absolution exactly, but possibility. The rest was up to her sister. "I'm proud of you," Rhys said quietly. "What you did in there, the restraint, the grace, the strength. I'm not sure I could have managed it." You would have challenged her to a duel. The thought did cross my mind. Dueling is illegal. So is attempting to destroy someone's marriage through deliberate deception. And yet, here we are. Louisa smiled against his chest. Here we are, married, expecting a child, having just forgiven the person who tried to ruin us, exactly where neither of us expected to be a year ago. I expected it, he corrected. I have been expecting this since the moment I first saw you. Perhaps not these specific circumstances, but the general shape of the thing. You beside me, facing the world together. That part I always knew. You couldn't have known. You didn't even know my name. I knew what mattered. I knew you were the woman I had been waiting for my entire life, without ever knowing I was waiting. He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. And I was right. About all of it. You are extraordinary, Louisa Montague. You always have been. It just took the rest of the world a while to catch up. I love you, she said. I love you. And I will never again give anyone the power to make me doubt it. I love you too, until I die, and probably well beyond that. When he kissed her, there in the carriage rolling through the golden Hampshire afternoon, Louisa felt something settle into place. Not the end of their story. They had decades yet to live, children to raise, challenges to face. But a foundation. Something solid and true that no letter, no scheme, no sister's jealousy could shake. She had spent 23 years being invisible. Now she was seen, and she intended to be seen for the rest of her life. As I come to the end of tonight's story, I want to share something with you. When I first discovered Louisa's story, pieced together from estate records and letters in a Hampshire library, I expected to find a tale of transformation. A plain woman made beautiful by love, perhaps. An ugly duckling becoming a swan. But that's not what I found. What I found was a woman who had always been extraordinary, sharp-minded, observant, resilient beyond measure, who had simply been surrounded by people too blind to see it, and a man who, for all his flaws and obsessive tendencies, possessed the one quality that mattered most: the ability to recognize genuine worth even when it came in unexpected packaging. The Duke and Duchess of Northcliffe's marriage lasted 62 years. They raised 4 children, all of whom inherited their mother's intelligence and their father's intensity. Their eldest daughter became one of the first women to publish architectural criticism under her own name. Their youngest son revolutionized the management of agricultural estates across England. Their estate became known for progressive practices, fair treatment of tenants, and the remarkable education provided to every child on the property. And the shrine? Rhys kept it his entire life. But instead of adding items in secret, he shared it with Louisa, showed her each new sketch, each pressed flower from their walks, each letter he wrote her on nights when he couldn't sleep. By the time he died at 94, the room had expanded to fill an entire wing. Their children called it Papa's Love Museum. Their grandchildren called it proof that romance was real. Arabella eventually married a viscount, a kind man who valued her opinions and encouraged her to read. She had children, a comfortable life, and a reputation for hosting salons, where women were permitted to discuss ideas rather than just fashion. She and Louisa never became close, but they found a kind of peace. At Arabella's funeral, 60 years after the events of this story, Louisa wept. Not for the sister who had tried to destroy her, but for the woman Arabella had finally become. This is what I want you to take from tonight's story, wherever you are in the world right now. The people who see you, really see you, in all your complicated, imperfect, extraordinary glory, are the only people who matter. Everyone else is just noise. And if you haven't found your person yet, keep reading books in corners. Keep being yourself, without apology, without performance. Because somewhere out there, someone is watching. Someone who recognizes your worth even when the rest of the world is blind to it. And when they finally find the courage to approach you, when they hand you a ribbon they've been keeping for 3 years and tell you that you're the only person who's ever made them feel alive, say yes. Say yes to the madness and the intensity and the terrifying vulnerability of being truly known. Say yes to the person who built a shrine to you before they ever learned your name. Say yes to being seen. Until next time, my friends, sleep well, dream deeply, and remember, they called her the Earl's ugly daughter. The Duke saw her once and said, "She's mine." And she was, forever.